So if you find this sleep story helpful or interesting, then give it a thumbs up, leave any comments that you've got below, and if you aren't already, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon so you can receive notifications of when future sleep stories go live. I have dozens and dozens of stories already on my channel that you can go and search. I also release new stories every single week, so I hope you enjoy this story. Just take a moment to allow your eyes to close. Allow yourself to begin to relax. And as you begin to comfortably relax, I'm just going to tell this sleep meditation in the background. And while I tell this sleep meditation, I don't know whether you're going to drift deeper asleep to the sound of my voice, or whether it'll be to the spaces between my words. And as you just comfortably drift and float asleep, you can just have a sense of a young girl walking through a pine forest. And as she walks through that pine forest, she can notice how tall all the trees are around her. She can smell that pine smell. And as the wind blows a breeze through the forest, she can hear the rustling of the pine trees as the branches rub together. And she can see the occasional dancing shard of light breaking its way down through the canopy to the forest floor. And the gentle sound of birds up high in the trees. And she can notice the sound of her footsteps, the occasional cracking of twigs on the floor. And she can feel that breeze on her face. And while she walks through this forest, she has pleasant thoughts in her mind and a pleasant feeling of comfort and peace. A feeling like living here and being in this pine forest just brings a certain connection to nature, where she feels safe and secure. And she follows a dirt path through the pine forest, then turns down another dirt path. She notices the tufts of green moss on the ground and the dark pine needles overhead, and areas of brown dead pine needles just along the edge of the path. And as she follows this path, the path gets narrower as the forest gets thicker and denser. And that increased density reduces the breeze, darkens the forest, softens the sound. And she finds her way to a small clearing in this forest. A small clearing with just a single house. And she walks up to that house. And this is her home, so she enters the house. She sees her parents just milling around inside the house. She can smell some cooking, and she heads to her bedroom. And she relaxes on her bed, and out of her bedroom window she can see the back garden, surrounded by the dense pine trees. And with this house here, she's got a view of the sky. And so she can see how blue the sky is during the day, and then the stars appearing at night. And she wonders what other forests are like. She's heard about forests in other countries. Forests of wide, tall trees. Forests of white trees. Forests of broad oak trees. And in her mind she's curious what these different forests would smell like, what the bark of the trees would feel like, and what it'd be like to walk through such varied locations. And as she thinks about the difference between one forest and another, relaxing on her bed, she comfortably drifts asleep. And as she drifts asleep, so she begins to hear the sound of circus music, and starts to have this feeling of flashing lights, of multiple colours around her eyes. And that feeling of sensing those flashing lights through closed eyelids. And the music gets louder and louder. And she opens her eyes and finds herself resting on a bench at a fairground. She stands up from the bench and walks towards the different rides. She can see people milling around. She can see children with cotton candy. Children running away from their parents to check out different rides, different amusements. And she's curious about a dark hut at the back of the fairground that looks like a ride that's been shut down. But something about it draws her in. And she walks towards that hut. And it's dark and quiet around that hut. And it's beyond the rest of the fairground. And as she walks out to that hut, so she can hear the rolling sea rolling in under the end of the fairground. She notices how it's sticking out, almost like on a jetty over the edge of the sea. And she reaches that hut, carefully leans forward, takes hold of the doorknob, opens that door, hears the door creak and squeak. And she walks in to this hut. And the hut's just lightly illuminated from the ambient light outside. and inside the hut she notices a twinkling of light and colour, and she sees, as she follows the twinkling, that there's a room that seems to have no back wall. And she's shocked by what she discovers, and excited by what she discovers. She sees that she can look out from this location over the dark nighttime ocean. She can see stars in the sky. She can see the moon in the sky. And she can see what looks like a long, colourful dragon of light with flowing, multicoloured ears, a long snout, a slight smile, the friendliest eye looking at her, a really long, weaving, winding body with two small front legs, two small back legs that are hooked up while it's flying and hovering. It seems to be moving its body gently to be able to hover there. And she can almost see through this dragon. She can see its whiskers hanging down and flowing with its movement. And as the movement of the body happens, so the whiskers move and flap, almost like ropes hanging from a moving rope bridge. And in a deep, comforting voice, the dragon tells the girl to climb on, and the girl doesn't know how, and she says this, and the dragon's alongside where the girl is standing, and as she looks at the back of the dragon, so she sees what looks like crystal steps appearing and a crystal carriage appearing on the back of the dragon. And she climbs those steps with a clink and a clunk on each step. She walks into that crystal carriage and sits down on a red velvet cushion. And then the dragon launches itself off into the sky. And she's shocked at how silent this dragon flies, and how she can see behind her that the dragon's tail is moving up and down, undulating, how in front of her the dragon's neck is undulating, but the dragon's managing to keep the movement of where the carriage is so comfortable and still. And she can feel the breeze as that dragon flies rapidly through the sky. She can feel her hair flowing backwards. And she can hear a twinkling sound from the dragon as it turns, almost as if somehow its whiskers twinkle like wind chimes. And she notices that this dragon is flying towards what looks like a distant storm. And the dragon comforts her and lets her know it's all okay. There's nothing to worry about. We're flying above the storm. There's somewhere I want to take you, something I want to show you. And the dragon flies towards that distant storm. And the girl's surprised that she can see lightning striking the ocean. She can see the bottom of the clouds lighting up in patches. And as the clouds light up, she can see that there's sheets of rain beneath the cloud. And yet, there's no sound, just a sense of comfort from the view. And the dragon flies up above the clouds. And the tops of the clouds are white and look so soft and comforting. And then she notices that there's a pure white castle up here in these clouds. And the dragon flies her down to that castle, circles around, wraps itself round and lands in front of that castle. The dragon says, "I'll wait here. Head inside." And the girl climbs off of the dragon onto the cloud. And she feels like she's walking on a fluffy, bouncy castle. She feels like she wants to just lie down, it's so soft. But she walks and bounces her way to the castle, enters that castle, and finds that inside the castle the floor is solid, marble, and echoey. And the inside of the castle just seems to glow with an almost daylight type of light. And yet there seems to be nowhere that light is coming from. It just seems to be glowing from everywhere. And in the middle of this castle is a grand old oak tree. And there's a woman stood next to that oak tree. And the girl walks over to that woman. And the woman explains that this is the tree of life, and that this tree of life gives life by seeding the clouds, stimulating rain, and as the clouds spread around the earth, so life spreads around the earth. And that the castle and the cloud phase between reality in this world and a different reality, and that there are actually multiple dimensions of reality. And the girl doesn't understand what she's talking about. This woman says there's no need to understand. It's just the way it is. that some things are just the way they are, whether you understand them or not. And then the woman reaches up and grabs some fruit from this tree. And the girl is confused, thinking oak trees don't give fruit. And the woman explains that this tree is a tree of life, and that it's a magic tree, so if you want something, all you have to do is think about it, and it'll produce it. And the girl thinks of the cotton candy that she saw that other child eating. And as she thinks about that, so one of the branches begins to sprout cotton candy, and she can smell that as it starts to grow out of that branch, wrapping around the branch. And then the woman reaches up, breaks that branch off and hands it to the girl. And then the girl walks with this woman while eating that cotton candy. And the woman walks her through to a library and explains that this girl is the only one who can pass on a very specific message, because it needs someone small, someone brave and accepting, someone who isn't fazed by the unusual, someone who's happy to accept the reality they see as being real to them. And that this girl, using her inquisitiveness, has demonstrated that she's the one to pass this on. And the woman gets a book and she reads a bit of this book. And she explains that there needs to be a connection between the air, the earth, and the water. And that as time has gone on, this connection has been lost. But with this girl's inquisitiveness, now's the time to reconnect the air, water, and the earth. And that the dragon can help. And the woman writes something on one of the pages in that book, hands the book to the girl just as she's finishing her cotton candy. And ushers her back out of the castle, telling her the dragon will know where to go. And she heads back to that dragon, climbs back into the crystal carriage. And the dragon asks if she's okay and holding on tight, in such a gentle voice, before launching off the cloud and swooping down. And she notices that she can see that fair, and that the dragon seems to be flying very fast out to sea beyond the fair and aiming down towards the sea. And the girl worries about this dragon flying so fast and down towards the sea. And the dragon says, "It'll all be okay. You're on my back. You'll be fine. Just stay in the carriage." and with barely a splash, the dragon passes under the water. The water rises up around the carriage, and yet none of the water seems to pass into the carriage, and she knows that there were no windows in this carriage. She could feel the air on her face. And the dragon seems to accelerate underwater, and she notices these pulses of water pass by her. And then the girl begins to notice in the deep, dark depths of the ocean what looks like another glowing white building coming into view. And she sees that off in the distance, deep under the ocean, is another glowing white palace. And this palace looks different, but it looks like it's made of whatever the same material is. And the dragon lands by the palace. And the girl says to the dragon, "But I can't leave your back, because there's water out there." And the dragon says, "It'll all be okay. Just get out of the carriage and you'll be fine." And the girl goes to the side of the carriage. She climbs onto the steps and notices that the water doesn't seem to touch her. She descends those steps to the ocean floor and notices that the ocean floor she's walking on seems to be dry, and that the water seems to be curving around her. And she walks towards this palace entrance. She climbs into the palace. She worries when she opens the door that the water will go rushing into this palace, and wonders how so much water above a palace, if there isn't water in it, isn't crushing it. But she opens the door to the palace and no water floods in, and she just walks dry into the palace, closes the door behind her. And inside this palace, she sees a woman standing near a pillar of water that seems to be passing all the way up inside the palace, perhaps even out the top of the palace. And in that column of water seems to be a tall coral. And she admires how colourful this coral is, and notices the way it seems to sparkle and twinkle, and can see the movement in the coral. And she walks over to the woman, and this woman says, "You've got something for me." And she reads from the book, and then she writes something in the book. And she thanks the girl for her help, and she explains that you're going to unite the three realms and help us to connect again. And the girl doesn't fully understand. and she hands that book back to the girl. The girl doesn't look at what's written in the book. She just takes the book and gets told to head back to the dragon. So she heads back out of the palace, equally as amazed again how when she opens the door, no water floods in, and as she steps towards the water, it moves perfectly around her, so that she walks totally dry all the way back to that dragon. And as she's walking back to the dragon, she can see the way. It's almost see-through underwater, creating a shimmering of light, pulsing of colour. And she climbs back into the crystal carriage. And rapidly that dragon moves off the sea floor and starts heading back towards the surface. And once it reaches the surface, it explodes out of the water, launching up into the sky. And begins to accelerate faster and faster, well away from where she started. And she has this feeling like it's heading halfway around the world. And it arrives at a location with mountains. And she worries she's going to be freezing cold. She's still only got her purple dress on. And the dragon says it'll all be okay. And the dragon circles one of the high peaks before landing on the snow. And she can see there's a cave entrance high up here in the mountains. She gets off of that dragon, walks through the snow, and is surprised to find that she can feel the crunching of the snow beneath her feet. She can hear that crunching of the snow beneath her feet. But she can't feel any temperature from the snow beneath her feet. And she walks to that cave. And as she enters the cave and begins to descend, she notices that the more she descends, the closer she gets to some underground light that has a feeling of daylight. And then she finds herself in a vast chamber, and in the middle of that chamber is another white palace. And again it seems to be made out of the same material that seems to emit light. And she walks to that palace, enters that palace, and in the centre of this palace she sees this narrow, tall mushroom. And she can notice the purple patches on the top of that mushroom, the purple streaks going down the sides of the mushroom, and stood underneath this mushroom she sees a woman. And she walks over to that woman. And the woman says, "You've got something for me." And she gets out that book. She hands that book to the woman. And the woman reads some of the book before writing something in the book. And after writing in the book, she doesn't hand the book back. she asks the girl to help her. And she gets down onto her knees and she starts digging in the mud beneath the mushroom. And the girl gets down on her knees and helps dig with her hands as well. And as they dig, they get their hands dirty. Then she places that book underneath the mushroom. She covers that book over with the mud again. She then waters that location with some water from a pot. And the girl's curious, wondering what has just happened. And the woman says that they've all needed to contribute to that book, and now it just needs to grow and become part of the nature and allow nature to take its course. It's not for their involvement now, but this will connect the tree of life, which is giving the rain. This will connect the mushroom, which churns up soil, which helps spread nutrients, and the coral. And the girl is curious what's going to happen, how it all works. And as she has that sense of curiosity, she begins to see what looks like some precious stones forming in the skin of that mushroom. Then she notices light seeming to emanate from those stones, shining off around the room, multicoloured. And the woman explains that this same thing will be happening to the coral, the same thing will be happening to that tree. This is connecting the realms. Of the earth, the air, and the water, and connecting the dimensions. That people are so used to the dimensions they live in, they're almost blind to the other dimensions. And yet nature needs all dimensions. And she explains that it may not make full sense, but the world is quantum. And the girl doesn't really understand. And she sees this flash of light come from the mushroom, almost like a pulse being given off, followed by another pulse and another, almost like the mushroom has developed a heartbeat. And the woman says that the same will be happening in the other palaces. And the girl gets told that she can have a gift for her help. That she can go into the library here and she can choose one thing to take away with her. And she walks into the library and she can see books floor to ceiling. But something she notices is a bowl with some water, and in that water she sees a single cherry blossom just floating on that water. And although she's got the choice of all these books to choose from, she feels drawn to that single cherry blossom. And as she puts her hand in the water and scoops that cherry blossom out of the water, so the cherry blossom begins to turn into a crystal. She finds herself looking at the most beautiful pink and emerald crystal in her hand. And the woman says, "Great choice, a very wise choice." And the woman takes a pin off of her top. She attaches the pin to that cherry blossom, and then attaches the cherry blossom to the girl's purple dress. And she tells the girl to go back to the dragon. And so the girl heads back out of the palace, back up out of the cave. She walks back through the snow to that dragon. She climbs back onto the dragon's back, into that crystal carriage. And the dragon launches from that mountain and seems to accelerate rapidly back around the earth, back towards that fair. And as the dragon arrives back at the fair and silently pulls alongside the building she climbed out of, she climbs out of the crystal carriage, walks down the crystal steps. She turns to look at this dragon, sees its friendly smile, sees its friendly eyes, and the gentle way it moves and floats, the way its whiskers blow in the breeze like wind chimes. The softness of this dragon. And the dragon tells her that I'll always be in your heart, we'll always be connected. You've done more today than you realize. And you're going to blossom well. And the girl doesn't understand. And in a blink, the dragon launches itself off and disappears off into the night. And the girl walks back through the building, back through that fair, and walks back to that bench. And then she remembers that she thinks she's dreaming. She had totally forgotten about that. It all feels so real. And then a man walks over and says to her, "You've been there a while." And he holds his hand out, and in his hand is what looks like a little clockwork mouse, and he winds that mouse up. And it starts twitching its nose. It starts walking around on his hand. And it looks so real in the way it moves. Yet it almost looks like it's made of pieces of wood, little pieces of metal. So intricately done. By someone who clearly understands mechanisms. And this person hands her that clockwork mouse. It says, just take a moment to close your eyes. Hold on to that clockwork mouse. And as you hold that clockwork mouse, gently pet that mouse. Comfort that mouse. And as you do, just feel a sense of drifting, floating, and falling asleep. And as she listens to his voice and pets that mouse, hearing the cogs gently whirring around, she drifts and floats and falls asleep. And then can feel the comfort, the warmth of her bed. Can notice the warmth of the sun shining through her bedroom window. And she realizes that it's now morning. She opens her eyes and she sees that clockwork mouse resting on top of her bed covers, on top of her. And she picks it up, almost in disbelief. She winds it again, and notices how it moves so real. And then she looks beside her on the bedside table, and she sees that cherry blossom brooch, and an old book she doesn't remember seeing before, and a handwritten letter. And she reads that handwritten letter, keeping to herself what she read, treasuring that knowledge, knowing that as the time is right, she'll read through the book. And she wants to share her experience, but she doesn't know if her parents will understand. And she can see her dad sitting reading a book in the living room. And she can see her mum outside painting. She heads outside into the back garden. And her mum's there, painting on a large canvas. And she's painting with her fingers, picking up different paint on different fingers. And she's blind and just feels the artwork. And as the girl watches for a while, she notices that this abstract artwork that her mum is painting seems to resemble the dream that she'd had. That at the top are clouds and a glow in one side. In the middle are mountains, and underneath is underwater. And flying right across the canvas is what looks like almost a translucent dragon. And the girl asks about what was painted. And the mother says she doesn't know what she's painted. She's just painting what she feels. That she'd splashed some dots of paint with a paintbrush. She'd smeared some paint. She went with the flow, feeling that paint and spreading it where the feeling took her. and in her mind she felt like she was connecting with the world in some deep and meaningful way. And the girl began to explain about her experiences, explaining about the dragon and how she thought at first it was all a dream. And the mother had a bowl of water next to her, and she washed her hands in that bowl of water, and she felt that brooch, and as she touched the brooch, she spoke about how she could feel certain energy from it, how her senses of touch and other senses are so heightened that she's sure she can feel something about it, more to it than just a brooch. And the girl explained about the multi-dimensions, about the connection of the air, water and earth. And the mother just took it all in her stride and smiled at her daughter and said your dad would also understand. And the daughter wondered what it all meant. And the mother said, when you're older, you'll know, you'll be painting pictures like this yourself. You'll be seeing that dragon again. And you'll be discovering more. And there's more for you in the future. And that day the girl went out, appreciating the world around her on a deeper level, curious about whether the dragon is out there somewhere, or whether it's just on whatever place she went in her dream, whether that was the real same world as she's in now, or a different world. From what her mum and dad had said, it sounded like it was probably the same world. She just accessed a different dimension. And that night, she read a little bit of that book, and she could smell from the pages of that book the most beautiful, perfumey smell. She had this sense that somehow that smell is being set up to let her know about future events and future adventures. And as she rested that book in her arms and was gazing at the mouse beside her, she drifted and floated with a smile on her face, comfortably and relaxed asleep.